have some more people pop into the webinar. For those of you who were able to join this morning, thank you so much for joining. We're truly appreciative of your time. As a reminder, all of the materials that we cover in the meeting, they're all in the Google Drive folder, so they're all completely available to you. If for some reason you cannot access that folder, let us know and we'll double check and make sure we have the correct email address for you in there and that you have viewing or editing rights, whatever is needed. Scarlett can make sure. And the agenda is in there as well, but I also have it on the screen here. Today's agenda will cover, I'll provide a brief update on the pilot site partner credentials, where we're at with developing our pilot site partners. And Steve Midgley, who's on camera here, will talk about the design of the Credential Registry. And Stuart Sutton is our closer. And he will be, again, going over the metadata infrastructure design. He's put together a presentation, and he always puts together fantastic presentations, so we can all look forward to that as well. And of course, the format is to please feel free to speak anytime, put comments in the chat, and ask questions and so forth anytime. I'm going to go ahead and move this agenda out of the way, and I want to also mention that Nate Argo is on, and he's always the official scriber, and so he is scribing, and I want to make sure, Nate, you're good to go.
Yeah, we're all right here.
Okay, good deal. So before we get going, does anybody have any comments or questions or anything at all? Nope? Okay. Well, what I want to do is, oh, hi, Peter.
Yeah, I made it.
All right, you made it with camera and everything. That is awesome. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to move our cameras up a little bit, give some more space in case anybody else wants to turn them on. You're going to see my screen change. I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share. And I'm going to do my screen share directly through the TAC folder. We have an April 22nd folder here, and I've created some subfolders based on each of the agenda items. Also, just so you're aware, as the Quality Assurance Committee is working, they're providing us information, and I'm sharing that information as well. That's not a specific agenda item, but I wanted you to be aware of that and have access to that information. I'm going to go ahead and pull up a slide. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. And this is, as you know, in the Google Drive, so you're welcome to go look at it. So the project is structured to recruit pilot site partners, and working with the partners, we ask them to identify a very small number of credentials. And so, we have some partners who are identifying a single credential. Others, I think there's one that has as many as 7 or maybe a higher number. But this is just to update you on where we are with recruiting pilot site partners and then working with them to get the extent of the credential information that we would like to have to basically fill in the metadata model that Stuart is working on. And so far, we have 45 partner organizations. Those organizations have all signed on through what we call an acknowledgement agreement. And it's not a legal contract or anything, but it's literally a written document that talks about, what we'll do for the pilot site partners. We have it, the approach is a service approach where we basically want to access information about credentials from both credentialing organizations and quality assurance organizations, with their permission and with them working with us. So once we have an acknowledgement document signed and they have identified at least a credential, we do a one-on-one webinar with them. And there's a Word document that we use as a feedback mechanism. It's called a draft online form, and it's used during the one-on-one webinar as a way to kind of go through it and talk about all the different kinds of information that we can use to describe their credentials and to get feedback. And we do find that with every meeting, we learn from our partners, and it's so important. So we're learning from our partners. We've got 45 partner organizations as of today. Our goal is 75. We may go higher than that. So we're right on target with our partner organizations. And those partner organizations have identified accreditation organizations and regulatory organizations. Now, likely the number of quality assurance organizations will significantly increase as we dig in further into the credentials that we have thus far. But also, we want to obtain a wide variety of credentials. So, badges, certificates, certifications, all the types of degrees, including graduate degrees, other types of micro-credentials as well. You'll notice on the slide that I have a note saying that some of the credentials, in particular those with competency-based degree programs, have credentials embedded. So we may have some of those partners actually on the webinar now who have CBE programs and embed either badges or certificates or certifications. So we actually have more than 102 credentials thus far, and at each meeting we'll continue to update that information to paint a clearer picture. But this tells you what we have from the 45 partners directly, based on the credential or credentials that they have selected for the project. And I want to go to, there's a Word document in the folder as well, and it has a listing of the pilot site partners, so you could see who they are. And we actually have another way of looking at this, of course, by type, organization type as well. And so for each meeting, I'll start to provide more kind of, graphical pie charts or bar charts or whatever, showing the different types of credentials, the different types of organizations. But this information, the listing of the pilot site partners, is it's open to the public on the main informational site, and I did include a link there. And then, of course, the other, thing to note, as I had alluded to, is that this is an ever-growing list, so this is not complete. And for all I know, we have more partners who have joined on today because we have a constant cycle where we want to invite partners. We meet with them in webinars. They bring back the acknowledgement document to their organization, and then we begin to work with them. So there is a process in place, a little bit of a cycle, and so there's always new partners coming in. So let me stop there and find out if anyone has any questions or comments about the site partners approach and the partners so far.
Jean, there's a couple of them Robbie's asked one and Carla has asked one in the chat.
Oh, okay, I see
yeah.
that now. Let me go back to that.
Yeah, Robbie wants to know why so few associate degrees.
Oh, well, good question. One of the partners, the executive committee partners, does represent community colleges across the U.S., and they have been recruiting associate degree type partners. And as a matter of fact, because of a very recent presentation to those groups, we have a kind of batch that we've met with to do our orientation, and then provided the acknowledgement form that I told you about, and so those are in process. But other than that, it's really just an outreach effort. So if anyone on the TAC has, relationships or contacts with credentialing organizations, and you feel they would be a good partner, if you want to connect them to us, we are more than happy to follow up on those leads. We have team members with work cred in George Washington University, and I call them the sales team, and they have the role of going out there and looking for additional partners, but they appreciate any assistance that you would have to connect us to those willing partners. So
Carla has a point of clarification. Accreditation partners or accredited partners?
So the partners, there are partners who are, so point of clarification, just to make sure, so we're saying, oh, there's two types of partners for the purpose of this project. And so we have credentialing organizations, and those would be organizations that, as some aspect of what they do, either confer, offer, assess for, provide preparation for an assessment for, a credential. And then the quality assurance organizations would be organizations who, similarly, they offer a credential, a quality assurance credential, such as accreditation. And I don't want anyone to think it's limited to accreditation, because there are other types of quality assurance beside accreditation and regulatory. But they issue a credential to another organization, a credentialing organization. So I'm talking about both credentialing organizations who are accredited and quality assurance organizations that, as a component of what they do, offer the service and then the subsequent credential of an accreditation. Did I answer that? So not all partners are accredited. So we really, and that'll be more interesting data that we'll begin to provide, is what what the quality assurance components are for partners that can obviously include accreditation, as well as other types of third-party QA input or credentials. Let's see, what other questions am I missing here?
So Jeannie, this is Robbie. If there's a process for recommending or connecting people up, can you send out just something that's no harder than an email to do that?
Oh yeah, definitely, sure. Yeah, we definitely have a process, and if there's an upcoming batch, and there may be of orientation webinars, basically the process would be that if you have a recommendation, we're interested in it, anyone on our TAC, and you could let us know either directly to me, let me know a contact, or you could forward the participation in the orientation webinar to them. But yeah, we can definitely do that, not a problem. Okay. Did I miss, I don't know why I'm having trouble with this little chat pod here. Any other questions that I missed? I see a comment on roll call. We're able to tell who logged into the webinar, and if there's anyone who came into the webinar but did not put their full name, Scarlett or Rhiannon will ask you to go ahead and identify yourself. Oh, look at Jim.
This is Eric Korb. I came in through phone. I don't have access to the internet.
Okay. I stopped sharing my screen. Sorry, I don't know if that was a comment or a question. I didn't quite hear that. But I want to go ahead and turn over the screen share and the floor to Steve Midgley, who's on by camera there. And Steve should be able to share his screen, and or I can, either way, whatever you prefer, Steve.
it'll be the same docs either way. So if you want to,
want me to go ahead and you can
to drive, that's fine, or if you want to hand it over, whatever.
Okay, I'll go ahead and I'm going to go to the TAC folder.
And everyone has this link anyway, so I'll just paste in so people can drive on their own.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, because if anybody who wants to go ahead and access, certainly may do so and comment.
Yeah, that document is open for comment. Yeah, Carla, well said. That was an accident. I'd like to think I made that joke on purpose. Okay. So since I have the floor, Jim, drive safe. You're freaking me out with the video cam. Yeah, Jesus. Yeah, okay. Be safe, buddy. All right. Don't look at the screen. I'll voice over so you can stay safe. All right. Thanks, Jeannie. My job here, I think, is to give everyone an update on the work that's been happening on the Credential Registry side of this project. As a lot of you know, Stuart and others, Stuart has been leading work with a lot of people on defining the metadata structures that will define what we're able to talk about. But in addition to that, we're looking for a method to communicate the information that's being described with that metadata. And that project is called the Credential Registry. So it's a place where organizations can register metadata about the credentials that they have, about themselves, and about credentials that they might use or otherwise have information they wish to share. So in many ways, it's a metadata community, and many of the people on this call, from both Jim Goodell and Jim Clow, Damon Regan, and Joe Hobson, Phil Barker, a lot of you have had experience with the Learning Registry, which is currently undergoing revisions alongside the Credential Registry. And so this update, in many ways, is an update on the metadata strategy for distribution that we're taking with Credential Registry and ideally with the Learning Registry community alongside of it. All right, so we want to exchange metadata about organizations and their credentials. We want to create a communications infrastructure for a community of organizations and individuals who want to share this information. Those are the primary functional goals. In terms of technical goals, what I've been largely working on, this is a set of goals that will sound familiar to some people, but we've been advancing them. We want this to be easy to use. I think this is a part of our learning from Learning Registry. We ended up with some infrastructure that was not simple to configure, to install, to update, or to manage. And so we want to build the Credential Registry on top of a platform that is easy to work with. It is also going to be open, and by open, not just open in terms of source code, although that's really important. The specification and the documentation will also be available. I should actually add that the community will be open. That's vital to this kind of work, but also that the metadata will stay open. So it's a system that's not designed in an open way that ends up locking up the valuable database, but that the data and the system both stay open. And normally those two things are in opposition to each other. And in this case, our goal is to design a system where that doesn't happen. We want it to be reliable. We want it to be persistent. And I'll talk through some of what these mean. Scalable, secure. And secure is a little bit of a nuance here because this is an open metadata repository. So what does security mean? We want people to be able to secure their identities even if the system is open for anyone to access it. So that involves a lot of cryptographic security rather than authorization and authentication security, which is normally what people think of with security. And it's research-based, and this is something that quite a few of the people on the call understand. the work that was done by U.S. Departments of Defense and Education, as well as Jeannie's team in Illinois and many other organizations on the Learning Registry, are driving our understanding of the Credential Registry and the features that I just described at a very high level, or the goals I described. So I'm going to describe a little bit about the technical architecture of the Learning Registry, and then hopefully we'll get through this and we can have a period of time for questions. The software in this case is going to be written in the Ruby programming language for anyone that cares. We're using a framework called Grape, which is a very lightweight and simple framework for APIs in a very clear and easy way. The APIs, I'm going to skip a bullet here, but the APIs are documented in Swagger, and that's actually, we're doing a lot of auto-generation. The API definition language is largely driving the Swagger definition, so those two things are closely related, which is useful. The schema, which will be provided by another team for describing the metadata, are going to be specified in JSON LD using JSON schema.org format. And so that hopefully is relatively non-controversial. We will provide mechanisms to support alternative schema, both XML or other sort of serialization, as well as alternative metadata in JSON if that's desired, but that's to some degree not what the Credential Registry is going to be relying on, which will be this JSON format, specifically leveraging schema.org and extending the vocabulary from schema.org outward to support the things that the credential community needs. On the bottom of the server architecture is PostgreSQL. We're using a specific data type called JSON-D. That's relatively unimportant because normally that's the bottom of the stack, but we're actually proposing, and I've mentioned this before on calls, that we actually move the metadata from Postgres to archive.org's collections infrastructure. So the bottom of the stack in terms of metadata, where you go to get your metadata, where the sort of canonical copy is maintained, is over at archive.org, so that if the server were to be shut down or someone else wants to run a second server, or however the metadata wants to be federated, it's not necessary to gain access to the actual physical running server in order to gain access to all of the components necessary to operate the Credential Registry. And that's part of what I was talking about above, about the persistent and reliable stuff and scalable stuff. We're trying to take an approach that will really allow us to easily manage all of that. All right, and then you can see this diagram, which is pretty high level, but just trying to describe what a publisher and consumer relationship looks like. So the publisher, forms a Credential Registry envelope. Then inside of that is a JWT signature. That's a Java Web Token that contains the schema.org resource, which will be extended, right? So it's schema.org plus all the Credential Registry metadata information. That's sent to a publish API. The publisher in the Credential Registry community will need authorization to publish. So there will be limits on who is allowed to publish metadata into the network, and Jeannie could talk more about that in terms of how that authorization is obtained, although it will be a relatively automated process. That's down onto this very simple Ruby Grape infrastructure and down into Postgres, which then will be backing itself up, so to speak, to archive.org. Similarly, a consumer will reach out to a list record or a slice API, which some of you are familiar with. These will be re-implemented interfaces, so they won't be backward compatible with the versions that are used by Learning Registry today. And from there, they will be able to verify the signature inside the Credential Registry envelope and extract out the schema.org resource, which that resource ultimately containing the credential metadata that is necessary to understand whatever it is that the consumer is trying to understand. We will be working on relationship metadata so that people can extract not just a credential, but answer questions about the metadata, like show me all the credentials that have been published by this organization, so some basic relationship information like that as well. And that's not specified in this doc. This is just a simplified sort of publish and consume walkthrough. Okay, so Robbie asked about OAI, which I'll briefly mention. OAI PMH specifically as the publishing or the consuming infrastructure is welded to XML, and I don't know what to do about that, but we ran into this problem the last time we went down this road in 2011, and I went and looked on their website, and as far as I can tell, unless someone can correct me, they are still welded to XML. So if we're going down the JSON LD route, there is no OAI PMH compatibility. It's just simply apples and oranges. Yep. So we should discuss Phil's point in a little bit more detail once I get through this description. We have done some performance testing, I'll just say briefly, on using JSON metadata in Postgres, and we're getting very good indexing and performance results without having to even break apart the metadata into components. I suspect that what Chuck is talking about is when you're trying to treat JSON LD as a triple store and actually decompose it into its component parts. And we can get into more detail about that, but that is not how we're treating this. So we are not saying you can bring any JSON LD schema to the credential registry, publish it, and we will understand it as its inherent component JSON LD elements, the triple store, so to speak. We are saying there will be one specific canonical JSON LD schema representation that we will ask you to represent, and that is considered the valid credential registry publishing format. So it will be a specific structure of JSON LD that we'll be asking for, not any valid JSON LD, any semantically valid JSON LD. Yep, that's exactly what I checked with Stuart about this, and he was on board. So I feel like that's a pretty good gauge of whether I'm stepping out too far. All right, so what kind of information will flow through the credential registry? We talked about that a little bit. We're talking about that right now. Mostly we'll hear from Stuart soon about that, so I'm not going to go into much detail there. How do I publish into the credential registry? The first thing, obviously, is you've got to get your metadata schema and your information aligned so that you can actually understand the information that you're trying to describe in the format that's necessary. And then you will bind that into, and here I mentioned this specific JSON LD format. So we're not just taking any old JSON LD. That bound metadata is called a resource. From that resource, you will generate a public-private key pair, unless you already have one. This is trivial to do, but you generate an RSA public-private key pair. You sign that resource with JWT using that key pair, and then you embed that JWT in a very, very lightweight envelope that then is sent to the publish API. So this is a little bit different than the current learning registry system because the signing is much simpler. We're relying on an external library, and the envelope itself is unsigned. So the metadata that you send around the resource is unsigned, and so that'll have some implications, but hopefully we've tried to think about it some. There's some smart people on this call who may point out some issues, but so far it looks pretty good. And with that in mind, I should probably start sharing around.
Take questions?
Go ahead. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so this is Eric Corp. We've been using a different signature. The JWT is pretty complicated, we found. And there's the HTTP signature, which is being proposed at the WC3 spec for the verifiable claims. We're using HTTP signatures. So I was wondering if there any consideration to look at that, because it's designed specifically for JSON LD signing. So I just was wondering where if you guys have looked at that.
We talked to Manu about it and went on a call you may have been on a little while ago, and from his communication, he said what I heard was we would really prefer to use this, but it is not ready today. So when it is ready, we would like you to consider it. That's what I heard from him on the last time we talked about this.
Okay, I'll get an update.
So if you have different information that this specification is ready and we should consider it now, that's fine. But what I heard from him was we're not even out of the working group into the technical group yet. So, but maybe that's
okay.
verified
I'll double
claims
check
and
on
not
that.
the signature. Yeah.
I don't even think JWT is an approved standard. It's just being used a lot by people. But
well, right. I mean, so let me be clear. Like the top line goal for me was easy to use, and that's where JWT has come from. There's a library in just about every language that's in common practice, and that was our definition of. So it wasn't. We didn't have a goal of standardized. We had a goal of easy to use.
Not a problem.
I'm not trying to be confrontational.
I'll table that, and
I'll
get back to you
yeah.
and find out where
that's
we are.
Great. Yeah, because we literally do not care. We only want something that's extremely easy to use based on the last experience, which Jim Clow, among others, can speak to, of signatures that are not cryptographically easy to generate, which we don't want that again. So, all right.
Not a problem. It's generally accepted as the JWT out there, but neither one of them have really become a standard per se. But because most people are using Java. Yeah. Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and like I say, I'm not being confrontational at all. I'm just trying to give you what the design goal is.
And neither am I.
And okay, sounds great. Yeah,
I couldn't remember whether we discussed that or not. I may have not been on that call. So
it did come up. It came up in the context of verified claims, which Manu was pushing to adopt, but they're not ready to adopt. So I'd love to get through the verified claims universe. But if HTTP signature is around, and I'm sure a lot of people are already Googling it to catch up, but if it's ready, let's give it a hard look.
But actually, that's going through a different standards board. That's going through IDSA, I think it is. So the International Secure. I can't remember the acronym, but that's a different group that's supporting that spec. So
that's good.
We'll see how it's moving along.
So we have Carrie has a question: are the keys intended to be associated with the owner of the credential or the app registering the credential on behalf of the owner? Right. So the key is supposed to be attached to the organization who is signing the document. So that's a little bit of middle ground between those two things. So if an institution is technically incapable of actually digitally signing a document, then the group that is technically capable that will be publishing it will sign on behalf of. And there is metadata, there is room in the metadata inside the resource itself, the metadata resource, to indicate we are signing on behalf of this other group who's technically incapable, or whatever, not to be pejorative, but who is unable to sign on their own. So the private key, the principle of the private key is when you maintain control of your private key, you share it with no one, and you use it for signing documents that you control. Whether you are the originator of that document or not, it doesn't matter. You don't give your private key away to somebody else to sign on your behalf. So that's the general principle. And so I'm just speaking of general principles here, and that I think applies in the case of this RSA signing for JWT. Okay, how do I retrieve from, and I posted in this document this gist, which is, again, draft, and it gives you a sense of both the high-level envelope and then the resource payload inside that envelope and what we think it will look like. So that is all very draft, but we're trying to make adjustments as we get input, and that gist in particular is changing, so it evolves as we evolve our understanding. So that's not a static reference. All right, so retrieving from the registry, we provide at basic some simple extractions. Slice, which is to extract a bulk of resources, like show me all the organizations that match this pattern, or show me all the credentials that have this characteristic. So it's a way of slicing out from the database some general class of records. And then list records is designed to extract date-oriented stuff primarily. So give me the last 100 days, or give me the last 2 hours of metadata, whatever it may be, credentials or organizations or whatever. So that's simple API-based stuff. Bulk retrieval has been something that's been of concern. In Learning Registry, it's hard to grab all of the metadata. It can take days in some cases to download all the metadata if you want to start over. That's not great. So this is part of what you get from archive.org, is you can just go to archive.org's collection for the Credential Registry and say, just give me these bulk gzip files, and you can download them, and you'll have these relatively readable set of files that you can parse and process however you like. So that's just an important principle, that you're not blocked from building a new system, importing it into your own custom database, or doing whatever you want. That's one of the design principles of really open, is the metadata should be trivial to obtain and do whatever you like with it. And then in addition, this concept of, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't have a visual. So
okay.
It might be up on the screen. It's going to be an open end, or you need a key to get to the API endpoint. Are you
so the Retrieval API, go ahead. So the Retrieval API, in my understanding, and this is up to the Credential Registry community, will be open. The publish interface to the Credential Registry community will be restricted. So only members who are authorized will be allowed to publish into the Credential Registry. But anyone will be able to extract data from the Credential Registry, and even further, there won't even be a server or an API that we control for the bulk retrieval. Basically, there will be a bucket at a destination called s3.archive.org, which is API compatible with Amazon's s3.amazon.com, and you will go to that collection infrastructure and extract whatever you want. So that'll be totally out of control of this institution. It's just archive.org's collection infrastructure. So the APIs, I believe, will be open, but by definition, archive.org's APIs are open to all. So no keys.
Thank you for that. That sounds great. Sounds like a good plan.
Yeah.
I'm putting myself back on mute because I'm driving in a car. I don't want to hear any noise.
Be safe. Thank you for that. Okay. So, and then one final mechanism, which is the idea of standing up your own new server. So we would like to see that you can go and download the code that we have written that provides these API capabilities, install it on your own server with some configuration option, indicate that that thing should go to the centralized, archive.org repository, and sort of quote-unquote boot itself up with all the metadata. So if you want just a copy with all your own APIs and your own publishing infrastructure and so on, that you can just extract all of that for yourself and start over. Now, what's important to note is you won't be publishing back to the same collection. You'll have to create, if you want to share your metadata once you've done that with archive.org, you'll be publishing to your own collection, not to the collection that's maintained by the Credential Registry group. So writing to the archive.org collection will be the Credential Transparency Initiative's prerogative. Reading from it will be world readable, and then archive.org will let you write your own collection, and so there can be parallel collections of metadata potentially operating out there. So this is a slightly different federation model than what we had with Learning Registry, but from my perspective, it's much, much simpler and meets most of the domain uses that we actually saw. So we created a system that had a richer federation network, but we never saw anyone making use of that network. So we're trying to create something that's simpler to understand, easier to implement against, and that provides all of the same benefits that we really saw people valuing in the learning registry environment. Okay, that's it. That's my story.
Did all of the questions and comments get covered? And while you're perusing the chat, just to make sure, oh, I see new stuff coming in. Let me just, Steve, since you asked me to comment
Sure.
on the authorization to publish,
Oh,
my
sure.
comment at this time, because this is all in design, is simply that what Steve's referring to would be a technical mechanism, not a judgment mechanism. So there could be, it could be that when the Credential Transparency Initiative, spins off into a sustainable model, which is the plan that the project leadership is looking toward and working for, that there may be some kind of governance, but right now in the project, because this is a pilot, the partners are basically invited. And so until all of this goes public, that authorization in a sense is controlled now, because we have heard concerns from all of the partners and TAC members as well, that we don't want garbage in there. But again, our role at this time is not to judge a credential and say, oh, this is a really good one, or we don't like this one. So that's not the intent here. The intent is to have security controls and a communication mechanism that can be a technical solution.
Great.
There's a series
Right.
So Jim, Robbie, and Phil are all asking, and Damon are all asking similar questions. Some of this stuff is undefined, so technically, right now, I think the key model is a master-slave system using archive as the master and downstream repositories as the slave, and the master can only be updated if you hold the S3 API key necessary to write into that collection, which is something that only one of the servers would hold. Architecturally down the road, I think the idea of bidirectional master slaving, where you can pull from a different community, so each collection is considered a community. There's one writable entity who writes to that community, although I think we could probably figure out how to have multiple servers doing that. It's undefined at this time. But you have one writable community, and then you have a second writable community. The organization that's writing to community 1 can be slaving to community 2, and vice versa. The server writing to community 2 can be slaving from community 1. So all the metadata could be made available on all the servers potentially, but you cannot publish metadata to community 2 via community 1's server. By definition, if you're reaching out to community 2, you are publishing into community 2's metadata. And so we may be able to make visible all the metadata, but in terms of if you want to update a piece of metadata, you have to go to the server where it was published, that kind of stuff. And so that metadata obviously needs to be transported around with the resource, meaning where do I go to update this record, and so that community will have to be defined in there. This is all a little bit uncertain because for the use case of this pilot, we only need one community called the Credential Transparency Initiative, and the idea of backing up to archive.org gives us enough flexibility there. But I do believe there is a run out here, meaning there's a technical strategy to address this complexity of multiple communities communicating with each other. But I wouldn't want to spend a ton of time gaming that out. But I would love to talk about it offline with anyone who wants to. Yeah, I mean, these new servers, yeah, I think it's going to be, domain-based, right? So the domain name defines the community. So if you create a unique domain name for a set of servers, that's your community. I think that's the technique we're talking about here.
Oh, thanks, Steve. I was thinking the naming too, just in terms of almost like the marketing name for the functionality that you were describing earlier. You know, that you think of new server, you think of like kind of unlimited potential of what you can do with that server. But if it's somewhat constrained, maybe the name could imply some of those constraints, so people don't have false expectations. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure if maybe you can give a specific example there.
Well, I mean, if I think I get my own private server where I can sort of get a copy of everything and you know, potentially, you know, sort of do whatever I want with it, you know, publish stuff into, but we're saying publishing is not necessarily, you know, part of that sort of definition of what, you know, we're doing with the new server. That there's some limitations on what that new server, you know, what I'm able to do with that new server. So it's not just kind of an unlimited new server. I'm just thinking just the kind of marketing name for how that would describe to people.
So let me be clear. Like the new server you will control it, and anything that the first server can do, you can do, except that you can't write into the old server's archive.org collection. You have to write into your own collection on archive.org. So you can create your own community. So I could make a new community around a different set of metadata and publish that to a different collection inside archive.org. So all of that remains full control. It's just simply kind of a logical thing, which is the Credential Transparency Initiative owns that S3 bucket on archive.org, and you can create your own bucket and publish your own metadata there. The question of synchronizing between those two communities, as Phil says, and I agree, I'm not worried about it right now because I don't have that problem right now, but I can kind of see down the road, like, I think we could figure that out if we needed to. Now, maybe I'm wrong about that, but my hope is that we can. But I want to be clear that if you download the code for a different metadata community, you have every capability that the original community has with that code base. Is that compelling, Damon, or do you feel like I'm not answering the question you were asking?
Absolutely. Yep. Just want to make sure that the expectations are clear. You know, I mean, I think the easy to use focus and, you know, not overthinking syndication, all that is great, wonderful. You know, just, you know, how as we start to message everything to, you know, an external community, I think trying to keep the ease seems important. But,
that's my goal. Yeah, I mean, we got things highly specified and pretty complicated the last time, and I think there's an opportunity to say, hey, there's a recognized need for sharing metadata along this sort of community line, but we had some limitations. We learned a ton from that pilot project. Now we're having this opportunity for this second pilot project, and I think I'm trying to, I really would welcome, and a lot of you have been really supportive of providing input into this work, but I'm trying to learn from what all the input we got, great input, positive and negative from the last time. And obviously we'll be trying to roll forward Learning Registry 1.0 into this same infrastructure, but that's a different topic for a different day. So I think it's Stuart's time on the presentation.
Yep. Thank you so much, Steve. That was really, really great information. Really appreciate all of that information. And anyone who, you know, all the committee members have access to that Google Doc, and anyone can feel free to put comments on it and so forth. And of course, the information will continue to evolve. And Stuart, if you have audio, Nate can go ahead.
I just have one question. Sorry to interrupt before we move on to Stuart, but is there a timeline on rollout on availability of the endpoints and the registry?
Yeah, I think
on the technical infrastructure.
Yeah, Jeannie can speak to this. I'm doing a walkthrough internal to my company where we're going to do some publish and consume stuff early next week. But so these endpoints are getting pretty close to runnable. But we're doing a demo in June, and I think that's our target time with Jeannie as a demo in June. Does that sound right, Jeannie?
We'd be happy to help test on the consumer side. We're very interested in that aspect.
Who is speaking?
Eric from Accreditation.
Oh, great. Yeah, that would be great. Thanks. Yeah, we totally welcome that. I posted in the chat my email address, so that's. And I think
unfortunately, I'm not on the.
Unfortunately,
I'm not online, so.
Okay, no, that's why.
My email address is in the directory of the in one of the files. Love to talk to you about it more. And I really would like to talk to you more also about building side communities, so I would call domains. I think that whole idea that you described is great, where you could have multiple domains of different metadata, and how you might also be able to create a traffic cop to direct you around. That could be an interesting problem to solve.
Yep. All right. Well, let's stay in touch then. I'll look forward to being in contact on that, because all the eyes on the problem that we can get, the better.
Sorry, Janie. Sorry for the interruption.
Oh, no. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Nate's going to go ahead and get Stuart's presentation going here.
Well, that was great, Steve. While we're waiting for this to come up, I'm obviously from the questions, there's a lot of interest in how it's how the registry itself is going to go together.
Nate, your screen share isn't showing yet. You need to click the yes you want to share.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Well, I could actually start talking a little bit. Oh, there I go. There I go. What am I in? What am I in?
Nate, you have the wrong one up. That's the March 17th.
Yeah. Oh, I could do it again. No.
No.
People don't want to hear it again. Hey, why don't we?
Sorry.
Why don't?
April 22nd.
And
Metadata.
filtered to
Metadata.
instruction. There we go.
Okay. Am I set? I think I'm set. What I'm going to do what have I got here? I've got about 35 minutes. Is I want to just do a high level report of where the metadata development is. In our last session or the session before, we talked about the competency framework piece and the doing a CTI profile of ASN. So this one I want to focus on the credential metadata itself, leaving out the competency framework data, which this data obviously references. So I'll talk a little about the key entities, very briefly, key entities and actions, and then I want to look at the domain model itself and break it down into a set of forms. I seem to be moving on here. Am I in control or what? Okay. All right.
I'm trying to guesstimate where you are, Stuart.
Oh, that's. You're handling moving forward. Okay, that's all right. That's all right. Okay, so keynote and entities. Then I want to look at the domain model itself, which and break it down into what I'm just calling zones for purposes of identifying what kind of functionality goes where within the context of the domain model. So there are 4 zones, and I'll show you those in a moment. And then I will conclude with kind of a reminder that what we're going to be looking at is pretty rich description, and that in the end we want both the rich description in relationship to the repository, to the registry, the Credential Registry, but then also a thin set in hopes of schema.org picking up that thin set for purposes of markup. So let's move on. Okay, things of concern. Primarily in the credentials model, there's the credentials themselves and agents, which I've roughly divided into two. Credentialing agents who actually create, modify, update, and issue, so forth, credentialing agents, and then quality assurance agents. And Jean alluded to, work is still going on with some of the quality assurance work. And so some of this is still in morphing mode until all of the information necessary to finish off the model is available, and then the associated frameworks. So let's move on. Key actions. This list is not complete. Notice the dots, but key actions here, I mean actions like accredits, approves, assesses, assures quality, confers, offers, recognizes, revokes, but actions that are taken by both forms of the agents, credentialing agents and quality assurance agents. So those will show up in the model as well. Next, skip right on. Okay, let's skip the labels. Okay, this is an image of the current model. Now the model still morphs as some of the committee work advances, and this is obviously not readable. There's a copy of it in the available folders. But next, this was a bunch of bills, and so this is going to be really kind of tedious. Zone 1 is the area of the model where agents and agent actions via credentials are modeled, and I'll break each of these out in a moment. Next, Zone 2 is the requirements and conditions for granting, removing. Any of the conditions necessary to acquiring the credential are basically modeled here in Zone 2. And next slide, Zone 3 is a set of profiles of key credential attributes. What we find in the data is that there's a great deal of variance, or can be a great deal of variance in things such in credentials and in these profiles based on variables such as regions and time. In other words, a credential may be offered in different regions at different times. So there's a great deal of variance, and a lot of that variance is captured in the profiles, in the credential profiles. Next. And then finally, there's the fourth zone is jurisdictions and regions of application, which relates to many of the entities. In fact, you'll notice the green lines, which are merely there to try and make sense of the model. The jurisdiction and regions of application relates to almost every entity in the model to capture those kinds of variances. So let's go on. Let's take the first one, and we can just skip past. Yeah. So this is the agents, credentials, and agent actions. The various assessments, and a lot of this has to do with the part we're looking at here with quality assurance organizations and their activities. So various assessments of quality assurance agents are modeled as subtypes of schema action, and the outcomes of Q&A actions are then themselves instances of credential type. So an accreditation of a program would be modeled as a credential within the system, and the action of credentialing is modeled as a schema based on subclasses of agent schema from schema.org. Yes, let's next. However, not every literal action in this context needs to be modeled as a subtype of schema. So, for example, you may have a credential with the credential A with creator agent B. There's not much reason to associate an underlying action with it, mainly because it would tend to be fairly non-controversial. You'll notice in red that these are forms of actions or relationships between organizations and credentials, and we're still working on, still discussing which of those relationships should actually be modeled as actions as well as simple assertions between agent and credential. So that's somewhat of an open question, and hopefully that we'll be addressing in the next few weeks. Next. The second zone are credential requirements and conditions, and these relate to everything from granting to renewal. What are the requirements in terms of competencies? What competencies does a credential require? So you'll notice off the conditions node at the top that it relates there to the right is a credential alignment object. So a condition a requirement of a credential could include multiple competency alignments. Going down from there, conditions for assessment are also covered. Other tasks and also learning opportunities that are available in order to meet conditions are all modeled through here. Each of those then has related profiles of a cost profile, and cost profile can be broken out into cost profile items. Next. The credential yes.
We got a couple of questions in the chat.
Oh, sure.
One from Carla. This came up earlier and I can understand the question, but this came up very early too. Well, I was talking about partner credentials, and so Carla's question is an accreditation is a credential, and I said accreditation is a type of credential issued by a QA organization. So I don't know if you want to add to that. And David's asking, what is a learning opportunity?
At this point, well, with Carla's, I think, Jane, your response is on target. That it is, in essence, a form of credential. Whether that credential is actually instantiated within the system is another question, and we're still dealing with that. In other words, so that an action to accredit, for example. So agent A accredits agent B. So we would have the action of that accreditation with object and that object or that action object could in fact point to an actual credential that is the memorialization or evidence of the accreditation. So yeah, what Jeannie basically said is the way we're currently looking at that. Another question. What is a learning opportunity? A course of study. It could be, I imagine it could also be something like apprenticeship. It could be, experiences, other than structured. Is that fair to say, Gene? Nate, anybody on that end? Yeah. Okay. So it is possible that badge endorsements may act as the same, may act in the same way as accreditation, except that it's a different form of credential, I would think. Gene, my content experts, Gene, Nate, Michael. You.
So I would say that a badge can be, an issued accreditation could be in the form of a badge if on some of the accreditation bodies, issue the equivalent of something that looks like a badge that you click on, and behind it is the metadata describing the accreditation. The differentiation really is for accreditation. It is a type of credential. They're issuing a type of quality credential to an organization rather than the credentialing organizations that issue credentials to people. And but from what we can see from the modeling, that a quality assurance organization, that what they offer is a credential. It's just a different type of credential that's issued to an organization and or an assessment, specific assessment or assessments, and or a program or a course or a task. But it's got to be issued to an organization and relevant to another credential. Makes sense?
So, yes, it does. I appreciate that. This is Carla. So I guess my question is, currently in the structure of badges, endorsements can act like accreditation bodies. So there can be potentially endorsers who are endorsing essentially a class of badges. And so that's what I'm saying. To me, those are kind of parallel.
Yeah, we're talking a lot about accreditation just because it's really easy. People are familiar with that, but there's many types of quality assurance credentials issued by quality assurance bodies. So I don't want to get hung up on only accreditation. And accreditation would be a type of a service. It's a service provided by a quality assurance organization. And so just like the other credentials, we want to be able to describe a quality assurance credential generically and say, oh, here, by the way, here's this quality assurance credential and this is what it means. But to, at some point, use the registry as a means also to connect an instance of an issued quality assurance credential to a credentialing organization. That's where the action profile comes in and the verbs that Stuart are using come in to make that the connection between the two. Otherwise, we're generically just describing credentials.
And there was another question, and I've now lost it here. Oh, great. Since you are modeling the actions as well, does it mean that there will be actions represented as credentials? And thus there will be a JSON LD resource. Well, there will be a JSON LD resource that represents those actions. Correct. And if that action is memorialized in the system with an actual credential instance, then that would be referenced from the action as a result of the result of the action. So yes. Robbie, I really regret that we used the term accreditation. The action, the action, can we slide back up to the previous, well, I guess we're going to slide up 2 slides. But the action, 3 slides, sorry. The action is able, it has both agent and object, and then it can have results, and it have other properties, which we will be augmenting the subclassing of the actions within schema.org's action. Can have additional properties to reference others. So again, I regret using that we used accreditation, other than it spurred discussion around it. But but an accreditation has a target. Yeah, the college is accredited. The registry doesn't contain the assignment of credentials, so the word accreditation is very confusing. Yeah, probably is. Jeannie, do you have anything to say with Robbie?
Well, the ISO 9001, is that,
Yeah,
so
Yeah, Jeannie, this is Bob. I can address that as well, the ISO. Robbie, if you have a specific question, but there is guidance out there on how to apply ISO 9001 to the world of education and training.
no, that's not, that wasn't the question. The question is, you know, there's a class of credentials that are meta credentials, right? That are these quality assurance. I'm just trying to understand what's in that class of credentials, because I mean, things like accreditation, ISO 9001, a software engineering certification, CMMI levels. All of these things are kinds of credentials. And I mean, I know that the registry has been focused on educational credentials, but there's a lot that go well beyond that seem to fall into this category. And I just wanted to, for myself, just understand what that kind of class is, and you know, and then of course check that against the metadata that we're having.
yeah, I'm thinking, you know, but that's a really good question as we dig into this and learn more and more about the quality assurance aspect. Is that the ISO as standard? And so a QA org would say, we will issue a quality assurance credential to your organization that we call something, you know, they have a name for it, but to receive our quality assurance credential, in part what you have to do are follow these standards, as well as, you know, maybe we're going to come visit your location and you're going to have to do some other things. So we're really talking about the actual credential that it becomes issued by the credentialing organization, and just like any other credential, has a set of conditions behind it that another organization must meet in order to basically earn that quality assurance credential.
So what Eric is saying is not correct. I mean, in other words, his point is that, are there only personal credentials, or are there also organizational credentials?
I think our model is going to handle both, because what we started to do, we started going down this path. If you look at our prior models that Stuart has been working on, the substantive changes every time we meet. One of them was to remove an entire profile file for quality assurance, because after really looking at it, it's really fits directly into the same model, because there's an organization and they're offering a type of credential. It's a quality assurance credential, and that organization is issuing that based on a set of conditions, maybe even a cost. I don't know, like some sell their standards, but there's a set of conditions that you have to meet in order to earn the credential. So in that case, the quality assurance organization is issuing the credential on an organization rather than a person.
Okay, just to push this one step further, what about something like Underwriters Limited, that offers a credential for an object?
Right. I'd have to look that. I've got my Google up here. I'd have to look it up.
So, for example,
that's basically a generic conformity assessment function in the marketplace, right? And it could be applied to anything in the marketplace, including a credentialing organization or a specific credential issued by that credentialing organization. So it's a general conformity assessment function in the marketplace. That is, like you're saying, it could be applied to anything in the marketplace.
I'm in learning mode here, folks.
Yes, I mean, it's just that it's sort of infinitely expandable, right? I mean, there's just a huge world
Yes.
of accreditation and credentialing that applies to first to people, and then to organizations, and then to things, and then to the organizations that create the things. So that, for example, you know, a manufacturer is accredited, and because they're accredited, the things that they produce are accredited, right? Are conforming to something. And so this gets to be a very, very slippery slope, and basically, I mean, it's wonderful in one sense, but I mean, I'm just wondering if there are boundaries that are intended.
What would you suggest? What if you didn't want to go down that slippery slope, Robbie?
Yeah, I have no idea, because it's really hard to draw those lines. I mean, especially, I mean, it's sort of like the thing that opened it up was the idea of accreditation agencies. I mean, in education of the, you know, Southeastern Accreditation Board or something like that, right? And that's sort of the point at which things start to get opened up, right? And I don't know where, right, you know, it was sort of what Eric Shepard was saying, was that maybe it applies only to individuals as opposed to organizations, because then that's a clear line, but I don't think that's necessarily the right line, so I have no idea.
Well, just for a point of clarification, from the project scope includes quality assurance, and so that is a part of the design, but it's quality assurance only in the relationship to organizations that issue credentials. And so I think it's defined by, you know, for this project, the definition of a credential.
So that's quality assuring the credential. I mean, it's true that you're doing it through the organization. I mean, one way to say that is that it's true you're doing it through the organization, but what you're actually doing is validating the credential. In other words, when you know, when such and such university issues a degree, that credential is a valid credential, which is the quality assurance, right? But you're not really necessarily quality assuring the organization. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's really differs from QA org to QA org as to how they issue the specific type of quality credential. But in order for them to issue it to something like, say, credential, it's going to likely be via the organization that is offering it. So, but the model allows for the QA credential to be, you know, issued by an organization to another organization and to an assessment or a program or a task, so it's really able to cover all of those.
Well, we are in the midst of this dialogue around the actions. That's one of the reasons why in the slide a little further down, where the properties in red, you know, we are still wrapping our heads around this, and we're still not. I don't think that we've heard the last words from the Quality Assurance Committee around some of the parameters within it. So this is very much open to discussion, very much open to discussion, and any input. We're running, you know, we only have about 10 minutes left, but on the list or whatever, because this is, you know, is significant, and scoping it will be important. Will be important. So let's slide on down, Nate, to kind of where we were, and in the profiles. So some of these actions are simply other processes and things within the credentials. So there are basically 7 at this point. There used to be, I think, like 15, and some of the profiling has been subsumed in other things in the model. But we have a process profile, which is an entity that provides the type, nature, and related information about various processes related to a credential, for example, selection, development, validation, and maintenance. So there's process. These are all credential profiles off the credential. There's holder profile, an entity that provides statistical information of holders of a given credential. That's aggregate information. It has nothing to do with personal identifiable information of a person. So it's the aggregate holder data. Duration profiles for describing the various durational aspects of earning a credential, conditions, minimum, maximum duration, and so forth. For earning a credential, the authentication profile, an entity, now this isn't that I don't want to confuse people, an entity describing the means by which someone can determine if a credential has been attained by a person. It's a description of the means by which. It is not a mechanism by which. So authentication in that sense is not happening within this context. Earnings profile, an entity that provides statistical information about earnings and related information for a given credential. Removal profile, an entity that describes the conditions and methods by which a holder's credential can be revoked. And an employment outcome profile, an entity that provides employment outcomes and related statistical information for a given credential. Those are all then also linked to jurisdiction, because you may have more than one holder profile dependent on the jurisdiction that you're looking at. So a credential could be operated in multiple jurisdictions and therefore have multiple of these profiles that are linked to various regions and so forth. So next, Nate, I think we're going to be just about able to get through very quickly. The last zone, zone 4, was the jurisdictional and regions of application. And the model has to be able to accommodate one-to-n jurisdictional variations where those exist. For example, we have a jurisdictional statement of the United States with the exception of Oregon and the state of Washington, as opposed to, and then of course the simple example of a jurisdiction of the United States or one individual state. So there's both simple and complex, and we're modeling that through a mechanism of direct reference to a jurisdiction, to a jurisdictional profile, or which allows for the statement of a jurisdiction and its exceptions. I said that this is all backwards. There is a jurisdictional profile that allows you to accommodate exceptions. There was richer descriptions of the jurisdiction. And it's possible to do a direct reference for simple referencing of a region. That is also possible. And I think the next slide kind of illustrates that. So you have some entity in the model that has a jurisdictional aspect. That jurisdictional aspect, if simple, can be, see the model coming out of some model, the arc coming out of some model and going directly to geocoordinates. Or if there is complexity, it can go to the jurisdictional profile where the jurisdiction can be described and also identified through mechanisms such as geonames, so the jurisdiction and jurisdictional exceptions. And there, my understanding in the data, there's a lot of this sort of variation. Next. Just a final little, why don't you go to the next slide? This was a build, and it's now into, just go to the second one, we'll forget the build. Just a reminder that what we're basically looking here is full description, the rich description, and that that will be accompanied by a thin description for use in markup and so forth. So, were there other questions here? Oops. Oh, a whole bunch. Okay. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to be picking up here. It's a discussion.
Yeah, that's a pretty complicated thread there, Stuart.
Yeah. Seems like there's a more interesting discussion going on over here. Which frequently happens, right? Anything in this for me? Yeah, sorry, I'm a bit confused now. Is the quality assurance action? Oh, we're quality assurance action intended to be applied to a credential object or an organization object or both? It could be, okay, it could be both. Correct, Gene? It could be both.
Yeah.
I think that was a yep.
Yes.
And it find a space for credential owner to explain the issued credential will continue. Carrie, I'm not quite sure what you're asking. It provides a space for the credential owner to explain the issued credentials, that the issued credentials will contain the QA actions. Well, the QA actions are embodied in the metadata. So, yeah, but I don't know that that answers your question. Correct. It simplifies the model dramatically to focus on individuals. The organization providing the credential. I'm not sure what you mean, Eric, by simplifying the model dramatically to focus on individuals. I think. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, fine.
Okay, great. So I had made the invalid assumption that this was just about personal accreditation, but I'm now understanding it's also being used to accredit organizations. So the side discussion here was about the accreditation, and so my understanding is, just coming down from the tree, if we think of ISO doesn't provide accreditations, but it does have some relationship with auditors like KPMG or Accenture that will actually audit organizations and say, yes, this organization lives up to the standards required by ISO 9001 or 27001, and U.S. accounting organizations will go at SSAE, but it is very much around auditing systems and processes to confirm that they live up to the promises that they are making. Now, in that, sometimes you need accredited individuals that to meet some requirements. So, for instance, for Microsoft to have a gold partner, you have to have 20 certified engineers. So my assumption, which I'd love to hear a reaction to, was that the individuals would be accredited, their credentials would be stored in the credentialing registry, and then when an auditor came along to audit an organization, they would be able to see which individuals actually held the credentials.
That was my understanding as well. This is Peter, and that the master would be the individual, and the other things would be attributes associated with that individual credential. Like, it doesn't come from an accredited institution. Was it recognized by some outside body? I think we're getting a little tangled in the weeds on this one, and we ought to go back to the individual credential.
Can I make a comment, Stuart? So.
Oh, absolutely. Stuart can use all the help he can get.
I had Nate go back to the model, and actually the model, the only thing that would change if we take quality assurance organizations out of the picture, which is kind of like the ask that I'm hearing. If we took quality assurance organizations out of the picture, there's only one change that would be made to the model. And the one change is the box. I hope you can see it. It's hard to read that tiny, but it's the box between agent and credential, because a quality assurance organization fits into this model. And so this model is not to issue credentials. We're not including any personally identifiable information, and we're not issuing the credential to the person. We're just describing the credentials, and we're describing them so the potential person to use or connect to that credential has the information that they need to understand the quality of that credential. So what the model does is it inherently accommodates quality assurance organizations. The only change would be to take out this box that you can see better now. And the reason we would have to have this box, and we could take it out, would be to allow for the connection between, if I'm a quality assurance organization, apart from just generically describing me, if you want to be able to say, and by the way, this quality assurance organization has issued a quality assurance organization to this specific program run through this specific organization, you have to have an action to be able to do that. And so all this is doing here, this box in the middle, is allowing that action and to have an instance of a credential from a quality assurance organization that shows, and by the way, we have issued one, so we're not just generically describing it. Did I get to any of the issues, or am I missing the boat, which could very well be?
So we're describing the credentials that an individual might be able to obtain. And just for scope, we're not describing the credentials that an organizational could obtain.
No,
or am I getting that wrong? All right.
Only insofar as it is an attribute of the individual.
Right. Okay. So I have a degree from Harvard, so therefore there's the attribute is that the assertion came from Harvard.
Right.
And that's an accredited degree.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
And if it's accredited, it would be the source of that accreditation. Yeah. That's the quality assurance organization. Okay. Really?
I think you've solved it, Gene.
Do you remember what you said, Gene?
So.
Thank you. Oh, good, good. Because I'll need a playback. So basically that was it, and we're over time. We're about 5 minutes over.
Yeah. So thank you, Stuart, and it's just really great to get all this input. I mean, it's love to hear all of the feedback and different perspectives. It's so essential for us to hear from everyone. So thank you for sticking it out and providing all of that. And so you've been impacting the models as we continue and will continue to evolve. And as a follow-up, I will send everyone the information that was requested earlier in the webinar to so if you do know of organizations that you want to recommend be partners with the project, and that means that we would include their credential or credentials that they select, a small number of them, to include with the project. I'll send that information out. Any other last ideas, thoughts, suggestions? Thank you, everyone.
Well,
Have
thank
a great
you all.
rest of your day.
That's great.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.